There comes a time in life when the roles between parents and children start to shift. As parents, you have spent decades raising them, guiding them, and making sacrifices. But one day, you may notice that something has changed. They no longer listen to your advice, they dismiss your opinions, or they make you feel like a burden. This can be deeply painful. If you find yourself in this situation, it's natural to feel frustrated, even angry. You may want to remind them of everything you've done for them. However, getting angry won't fix the problem. In fact, it often makes things worse. Instead, there is a more effective way to regain their respect without fights or resentment. Today, we will explore 6 powerful Buddhist-inspired principles to rebuild the respect your children have for you. These methods are not about control, but about self-respect, inner peace, and leading by example. Some of them may surprise you, but if you stay until the end, you will discover a profound shift in your relationship with your children. In Buddhist teachings, detachment does not mean indifference. It means loving without clinging, caring without controlling, and giving without expecting anything in return. When parents seek approval from their children, they unknowingly place their happiness in someone else's hands. By practicing detachment, parents can love their children unconditionally while also honoring their own needs and boundaries. A parent who is emotionally self-sufficient is more likely to have a balanced, healthy relationship with their children. They do not need constant reassurance or validation, and as a result, their interactions become more genuine and fulfilling. This shift in perspective allows both the parent and child to interact with each other from a place of love rather than obligation or expectation. I once knew a woman named Margaret. In her younger years, she was independent, confident, and strong. She had a successful career, a vibrant social life, and a deep sense of self-worth. However, as she aged and her children became adults, she slowly began to let their needs dictate her life. She avoided conflict, always adjusted her schedule to fit theirs, and stayed silent even when they spoke down to her. She thought that by doing so, she was fostering harmony in the family. Over time, Margaret noticed a painful reality. Her children had stopped valuing her opinions. They saw her as someone who would always adjust, always agree, and always be available at their convenience. The more she sacrificed, the less she was appreciated. One day, Margaret made a decision. She would no longer seek their approval at the cost of her own happiness. She started saying no when necessary, expressing her thoughts openly, and prioritizing her own well-being. It wasn't easy at first. Her children were surprised by the shift. But over time, something remarkable happened. They began to see her in a new light. They listened to her again, respected her boundaries, and valued her time. The relationship transformed because she had stopped seeking their approval and instead cultivated self-respect. Lessons to take away. Prioritize your well-being. Your happiness and self-worth should not depend on how much your children approve of you. Live a life that fulfills you. Set boundaries. Saying no does not mean you love your children any less. It means you respect yourself. Love without clinging. True love is given freely, not in exchange for approval or validation. Be a model of self-respect. When you respect yourself, others, including your children, will follow suit. Embrace detachment. Loving your children does not mean losing yourself in them. Balance your love with a strong sense of self. The role of a parent evolves over time. When children are young, they rely on you completely. As they grow, they seek independence, and as they become adults, they form their own lives. This is a natural progression. By letting go of the need for their approval, you grant both yourself and your children the freedom to have a relationship based on mutual respect rather than dependency. In doing so, you not only cultivate your own happiness, but also foster a healthier, more balanced connection with your children. Stop chasing their approval. Instead, stand firm in your self-respect, embrace your own journey, and love them freely without losing yourself in the process. Number 2, lead by example, not by argument. When your children dismiss your opinions or treat you disrespectfully, your first instinct may be to argue. However, arguing rarely works. Respect is not demanded through words, but earned through presence and dignity. In many families, generational gaps lead to misunderstandings. Parents often feel unheard while children feel controlled. This dynamic creates frustration on both sides, But instead of engaging in endless debates, what if we approached the situation differently? In Buddhism, we practice right speech, Changu, one of the Eightfold Paths leading to wisdom and peace. Right speech means choosing words that are truthful, beneficial, and spoken with kindness. It discourages speaking out of anger or ego and encourages communication that fosters understanding. When faced with disrespect, the natural reaction is to defend oneself, to argue, or to demand respect. But what if, instead of reacting with frustration, we responded with mindfulness? Rather than saying, "You should respect me because I am your parent," we demonstrate dignity through our actions. Respect is not something we can force, it is something we inspire. If we wish our children to be respectful, we must first show them what respect looks like, not just toward them, but in how we treat others and ourselves. This story illustrates a powerful truth. Influence is not about the volume of our words, but the depth of our presence. We teach our children more through our behavior than through our lectures. Practice mindful communication. Before responding, ask yourself, are my words necessary? Will they bring understanding or just escalate the conflict? Lead with action. If you want your children to respect you, show respect in your daily life. Model the patience, kindness, and wisdom you wish to see. Stay centered. When faced with resistance, remain calm. Your grounded presence is more powerful than any argument. Over time, our children will learn, not because we force them, but because they see and feel the difference. In the end, true respect is not about authority. It is about the quiet strength of character. Number 3, withdraw emotional dependence. One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that you cannot depend on your children for emotional fulfillment. It is natural for parents to feel deeply connected to their children, but when this connection turns into emotional reliance, it can create unhealthy dynamics. The moment children sense that their parents need them to feel valued or happy, the power dynamic shifts, and instead of fostering closeness, it can lead to emotional distance. The Buddha taught that true happiness comes from within, not from external sources. If you rely on your children to make you happy, you are giving them control over your emotional state. This attachment can lead to suffering because it creates expectations that may not always be met. Buddhism encourages self-sufficiency in emotional well-being. By practicing detachment, not in the sense of indifference, but in the sense of inner peace, you can cultivate a balanced and fulfilling life without placing the burden of your happiness on your children. This does not mean withdrawing love, but rather it means loving freely without expectation, allowing relationships to flourish naturally. Emotional independence does not mean emotional isolation. It means learning to cultivate inner peace and self-contentment so that relationships can be based on love and mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Here are some ways to develop emotional independence. Rediscover your passions. Invest time in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. Whether it's art, music, gardening, or volunteering, engaging in something meaningful can shift the focus away from needing external validation. Build a support network. Expand your social connections beyond your immediate family. Having friends, community groups, or spiritual gatherings can provide a sense of belonging and prevent over-reliance on children. Practice mindfulness and meditation. Developing mindfulness helps in observing emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. Meditation, in particular, can create a deep sense of inner peace and emotional resilience. Set healthy boundaries. Recognizing that your children have their own lives and responsibilities is crucial. Setting boundaries allows them the freedom to connect with you on their terms, rather than out of obligation. Reframe your perspective. Instead of viewing your children's independence as a loss, see it as a success. Their ability to live independently is a testament to your successful parenting. Withdrawing emotional dependence does not mean withdrawing love. It means embracing a new chapter in life where love is given freely, without expectation or attachment. By fostering inner peace and self-sufficiency, you allow your relationships to evolve naturally, creating deeper, more meaningful connections. Letting go of emotional dependency is not about giving up on relationships, but about enriching them by finding fulfillment within yourself first. When you are content within, love flows more freely, and relationships become healthier and more joyful for everyone involved. Number 4, Set and enforce boundaries. Respect begins with clear boundaries. If you allow your children to dismiss your opinions or treat you as an afterthought, they will continue doing so. Boundaries are not about control or punishment, they are about self respect and fostering mutual respect in relationships. As parents age, maintaining a strong sense of self worth is essential. Many older adults find themselves feeling invisible in their children's lives, not because they lack love, but because they have not set clear expectations for how they want to be treated. Setting and enforcing boundaries requires both clarity and consistency. If you express your needs but fail to uphold them, others may not take you seriously. For example, if you ask your children to call once a week but accept months of silence without addressing it, they may assume your request was not important. Boundaries must be followed through with action. Compassion is not about letting people walk over you. The Buddha taught the importance of wisdom in relationships, knowing when to give and when to step back. In Buddhist teachings, boundaries are a form of self-care and mindfulness. Loving kindness, metta, is a core principle, but it must include yourself as well as others. The concept of upaya, skillful means, in Buddhism reminds us that every situation requires a thoughtful approach. There is no single way to set boundaries that works for everyone. The key is to act with wisdom and awareness. If a child speaks to a parent disrespectfully, responding with anger only reinforces negativity. But calmly and firmly stating, "I will not continue this conversation if you speak to me that way," teaches both self-respect and the importance of mutual respect. In the story of the Buddha's life, there were times when he distanced himself from people who were not ready to listen or who sought to harm him. He understood that boundaries were necessary, even for someone filled with boundless compassion. Parents, too, must recognize that love does not mean endless tolerance of mistreatment. A loving heart can still say no. Practical steps to enforce boundaries. Be clear about your needs. Clearly express what is and isn't acceptable in your relationships. For example, if you don't want last-minute visits or calls at inconvenient times, say so. Communicate calmly but firmly. Boundaries should be set in a composed, respectful manner. Avoid emotional outbursts as they may lead to defensiveness rather than understanding. Follow through with actions. If you say you will not tolerate being spoken to harshly but continue engaging in such conversations, your words lose power. Be consistent in upholding your boundaries. Lead with love, not guilt. Boundaries are about mutual respect, not about making others feel bad. Frame them in a way that emphasizes care rather than punishment. Accept that some resistance is natural. People often push back against new boundaries, especially if they are used to the old dynamic. Stay patient but resolute. By setting and enforcing boundaries, you cultivate relationships built on respect, love, and appreciation. Instead of feeling overlooked, you establish yourself as a valued and respected presence in your family's life. Number 5, stop giving without appreciation. As parents, you may instinctively give to your children without expecting anything in return. Love and care often drive you to provide, protect, and support them in every way possible. However, when generosity is taken for granted, it loses its meaning. Giving without appreciation can lead to exhaustion, resentment, and a diminished sense of self-worth. It is essential to cultivate a balance between generosity and self-respect, ensuring that kindness is valued rather than exploited. In Buddhism, generosity, dana, is considered one of the highest virtues. It is an act of selflessness that fosters goodwill, compassion, and interconnectedness. However, wise generosity is essential. Giving should be done mindfully, ensuring that it contributes to both the giver and the receiver's well-being. When kindness is not appreciated, it is not true generosity, but rather an unhealthy attachment. Buddhism teaches that giving should not stem from a need for validation or obligation. Instead, it should arise from genuine compassion and a desire to help others grow. When generosity is continually met with entitlement or ingratitude, it may indicate that the receiver has not learned the value of what is being given. In such cases, withholding unnecessary giving can be a lesson in mindfulness, gratitude, and personal growth for both parties. George, a devoted father, always supported his children, both financially and emotionally. He covered their expenses, helped them through difficulties, and always put their needs above his own. However, as time went on, he noticed that his children had come to expect his help rather than appreciate it. When he provided financial support, there were no words of gratitude. When he offered guidance, it was often ignored. Over time, George felt drained and unappreciated. One day, he decided to make a change. He started setting boundaries and saying no to unreasonable demands. At first, his children were frustrated and confused. They had grown accustomed to receiving without effort or acknowledgement. However, as time passed, they began to realize the true value of their father's generosity. They learned to appreciate his support when it was given and developed a sense of responsibility for their own lives. By setting limits, George not only regained his self-respect, but also taught his children a crucial lesson in gratitude and self-sufficiency. Setting boundaries in giving does not mean withholding love or becoming selfish. Instead, it is an act of self-care and respect for both the giver and the receiver. Here are a few principles to ensure that your generosity remains meaningful and appreciated. Give mindfully. Reflect on why you are giving. Is it out of love, obligation, or fear of rejection? Giving should be a conscious act of kindness, not an automatic response. Observe reactions. Pay attention to how your generosity is received. If appreciation is lacking, consider whether your giving is truly beneficial or enabling unhealthy behavior. Encourage reciprocity. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and gratitude. While you may not expect material returns, appreciation and acknowledgement should be present. Set limits. Saying no when necessary does not make you unkind. It teaches others to value what they receive and fosters independence. Prioritize your well-being. Overgiving at the expense of your own happiness and well-being is not noble. It is self-destructive. Balance generosity with self-care. Generosity is a beautiful quality, but it must be given wisely. When kindness is taken for granted, it loses its meaning and can lead to resentment. By practicing mindful giving and setting healthy boundaries, you ensure that your kindness is valued and that you maintain your own well-being. True generosity is not about giving endlessly, but about giving meaningfully. Number 6, build a life outside of them. One of the most powerful ways to regain your children's respect is to demonstrate that your happiness and fulfillment are not solely dependent on them. Many parents, especially as they age, naturally want to stay close to their children, offering guidance and support. However, when this attachment becomes too strong, it can create pressure and even resentment. By cultivating a life outside of your children through hobbies, friendships, and meaningful activities, you not only enrich your own life, but also show them the strength of your independence. Buddhism emphasizes the importance of self-reliance and inner peace. The Buddha taught that true happiness comes from within, not from external attachments. When parents tie their emotional well-being to their children's actions or decisions, they risk suffering when things don't go as expected. Instead, finding personal purpose and meaning in life, independent of family roles, allows for a deeper sense of fulfillment. This doesn't mean withdrawing love or care from your children. Rather, it means shifting the focus from expecting them to be the sole source of your joy to embracing your own life journey. Detachment in Buddhism is not about emotional coldness, but about cultivating balance and allowing relationships to thrive without clinging. Eleanor, a widow in her late 70s, dedicated most of her life to raising her children. She provided for them, sacrificed for them, and continued to involve herself deeply in their lives, even as they became adults with families of their own. Her intentions were loving, but over time she noticed a growing distance between herself and her children. She constantly checked in on them, gave unsolicited advice, and felt hurt when they didn't call or visit as often as she expected. At family gatherings, her children seemed impatient, sometimes even dismissive. Eleanor couldn't understand why. After all, everything she did was out of love. One day, a close friend gently pointed out that Eleanor had been living through her children instead of for herself. The realization stung, but it was a wake-up call. Inspired, she decided to make a change. She started small, joining a local book club, taking yoga classes, and volunteering at a community shelter. Eventually, she pursued a lifelong dream, traveling. At first, her children were surprised. They were used to her being readily available for every little need. But as Eleanor built her own life, something remarkable happened. her children began seeing her differently, not as someone constantly seeking their attention, but as a person with passions, experiences, and wisdom of her own. They admired her independence and respected her more. Their relationships improved, not because she distanced herself emotionally, but because she stopped making them the center of her existence. By reclaiming her own identity, Eleanor showed her children that she was a whole person outside of her role as a mother. If you find yourself overly dependent on your children for emotional fulfillment, consider taking steps to create a life outside of them. Rediscover your passions. Think back to activities you once loved but put aside while raising your family. Whether it's painting, gardening, writing, or playing an instrument, now is the time to reconnect with what brings you joy. Expand your social circle. Loneliness often drives parents to rely too much on their children. Strengthen friendships, join clubs, or participate in group activities where you can meet like-minded people. Engage in meaningful work. Volunteer work, part-time jobs, or community projects can give a renewed sense of purpose. Helping others can be deeply fulfilling and reduce the need to seek validation from family members. Prioritize health and well-being. Physical and mental wellness are crucial. Exercise, eat well, and practice mindfulness or meditation to stay balanced. A healthy, vibrant life is inspiring to those around you. Set boundaries. Being available for your children is wonderful, but they also need space to grow. Avoid over-involvement in their personal matters unless they seek your guidance. Travel and explore. If possible, visit new places, even if it's just a nearby town. Exploring different cultures, foods, and landscapes can be exhilarating and enriching. Embrace change. Life is ever evolving. Accepting change with an open heart can prevent feelings of loss and help you appreciate the present moment. Your life doesn't end when your children become independent. In fact, it's an opportunity to reinvent yourself and embrace new experiences. By living fully, you set a positive example for your children, showing them that happiness is self-created, not dependent on others. This shift not only strengthens your relationship with them, but also brings you a renewed sense of joy and fulfillment. Respect is not something you can demand. It is something you inspire. Many people spend their lives seeking validation from others, believing that respect comes from external recognition. However, true respect is not given freely to those who chase it. It is naturally drawn to those who embody strength, integrity, and self-worth. When you constantly seek approval, you place your self-worth in the hands of others. This creates an endless cycle of dependency, where your happiness is dictated by their validation. Instead, focus on self-improvement and let your confidence grow from within. Respect is earned through actions, not words. Live with integrity, be kind yet firm, and stay true to your values. Others will naturally recognize your strength and admire your character. If your emotional well-being depends on how others treat you, you give them control over your peace. Learn to be emotionally self-sufficient by practicing mindfulness and self-reflection. Without clear boundaries, people may take you for granted. Respect yourself enough to say no when necessary and protect your time, energy, and emotional well-being. Generosity is beautiful, but when you constantly give without receiving appreciation, it leads to exhaustion and resentment. Value yourself enough to recognize when your kindness is being taken for granted. Your happiness should never be solely dependent on one person or group. Develop personal interests, hobbies, and relationships that bring you joy. The more fulfilling your life becomes, the less you will rely on others for validation. By practicing these principles, you will not only regain respect, but also cultivate inner peace and wisdom in your relationships. True respect is a reflection of your self-worth. When you honor yourself, others will do the same. If you found this video insightful, please like, comment, and subscribe to Buddhist Mindfulness for more content on wisdom, mindfulness, and personal growth.